Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to make some steak with some smothered potatoes. So the first thing that I do is I start with my steak first. I need it to get to room temperature so that it can cook evenly, and I like to season it so that the seasonings can have some time to kind of settle into the meat. And so here I am first starting off with kosher salt. For the steak, it doesn't really have too many seasonings because I don't want to have too many different types of flavors. And then after each time I add seasoning, I like to pat it down. I forget the term for it, but professionals and chefs definitely know the term. And I feel like I know what it is, but I'm not going to say that because it kind of sounds a little too rated R. But yeah, so here I am seasoning the meat. There are some parts that I realize doesn't have enough of the kosher salt, and so I sometimes go back and I season those particular sections, and then I spread it out and beat it again. So next we have the black pepper, and here I do the same steps. I make sure that it's spread evenly along the steak, and then I pat it. And I spend a lot of time with this part because I feel like it does something different to the flavors, and that by no means am I a professional, but I have been cooking steak for a little bit, and I feel like the flavors are just better when I do it this way. I've tried it the other way where I really didn't do this, and I felt like the seasonings didn't really stick to the meat. What you'll see a lot is Tony's. I didn't show it all the way here, but you will definitely see the seasoning a lot in a lot of my dishes. For Tony's, I don't spread that much on it because it's already a lot of kosher salt on it, and Tony's is a very salty seasoning, so I try not to go too far with this one. But I have to have the Tony's on it, and yes, I put that on everything. For the next steps, I flip it over and I do the same thing. These are some really big steaks, so I definitely gave this about an hour, maybe an hour and a half for it to get to room temperature so that it can really cook evenly. For my potatoes, I don't really want them to be diced, I just want them to be sliced. I'm basically cooking for the entire family, so I do have a lot of potatoes, and you might not need a lot of potatoes if you are just cooking for 1 or 2 people, but I was cooking for 4 people, and for the potatoes, I was also cooking for a child here. So even though they weren't eating the steak, they were gonna have some potatoes, so I have quite a bit of potatoes. For the pot, I'm putting it mainly on medium to high heat, just to get the canola oil or vegetable oil. It doesn't really matter which type of oil that you use. I am heating it up, and then I want my potatoes to essentially fry once it hits the bottom of the pan. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of potatoes. So what I'm gonna do is use a spatula to flip it around so that each potato can be lightly coated by the oil. I seasoned the potatoes with black pepper, Tony's, and some kosher salt. And what's really important here is as you're checking on the potatoes, you can add more seasoning and taste it. If you add too much salt at the beginning, it's honestly too late to go back, and then you have some salty smothered potatoes. After lightly coating each potato with the oil, I start off with about a cup and a half or 2 cups of water. As I mentioned, if you have less potatoes, I would even start off with just maybe a half a cup of water. I kind of play it by ear. Here I did about 1.5 cups, but then I did later add another half. Then I'm gonna go ahead and grab a lid and put it over and turn the heat down so that the potatoes can cook at a proper speed. Next up, we are gonna work on the onions. I like my onions to be medium sized, so what I do is I slice them first and then I slice them again after the first slice. And if you like your onions to be on the smaller side, you can definitely dice them, but this is just a preference of mine. As for my pots, I usually use a cast iron skillet. It just cooks the steak better. If you don't have a cast iron skillet, then there's no need to worry. You can still use a nonstick pan. I would just be careful with how high you have the heat. One thing to note about cast iron skillets is to never touch the handle of it, especially when it's hot. You always want to make sure you use oven mittens. Here I touched it because it wasn't hot yet, but this is just advice for those who are not used to using cast iron skillets. You will burn your hand. I have 2 cast iron skillets because, as I mentioned, I am cooking for family. So I am going to have some onions in one pot, and then I also have mushrooms that I've washed off, and I'm gonna saute that in the other pot. As they're cooking, I want to make sure that I move them around so that they can cook evenly. And my heat isn't really up that high here. The cast iron skillet, it's going to keep the same temperature for a little while. So I am just kind of letting it simmer on a lower temperature just so I can make sure that the cast iron skillet doesn't get overheated. Then everything will start cooking way too fast. So this is the process of the onion so far. And then I got the mushrooms, and the potatoes are doing their thing still. Checking on your potatoes while it's doing its thing is really important because you don't want it to become mashed potatoes, but you also don't want it to be very firm. So mixing it allows you to see how it's doing. And if you find, okay, maybe it's getting to the point where it's a little too mushy, so then that's when you want to lower the temperature completely. If you find that it's way too firm and there's not enough water, I would add a little bit more water and continue letting it to do this thing and stirring it occasionally. Now we are on to the steaks. I'm kind of doing the same process here that I did with the onions and the mushrooms. Usually do about a tablespoon of butter, mix it around again. Also add some olive oil and spread it out along the pan. By now, my cast iron skillet is very, very hot. There's no need to turn the fire to medium high because then my steak will cook way too fast and then I'd have really, really, really raw steak. So I'm adding my steak. I'm going to keep it on this side for maybe about 4 to 5 minutes and then I'm gonna flip it. I also added a little bit of olive oil to the second cast iron skillet because that one's more of an older cast iron skillet, so I was noticing that my steak seasoning was sticking to the bottom a little bit on that one side, and to prevent it doing that to the other side, I added a little bit of olive oil so that it can have a little bit more non-stick protection. Since these are some really big steaks, I'm flipping it a lot more than I would if they were thinner. Mainly because if I just let it try to cook too much on one side, then I'm gonna find that the middle is not cooked well. As you flip, you want to make sure that the steak continues to lie flatly on the cast iron skillet because you want to make sure that every piece of that meat is getting affected by the heat. In one of the same cast iron skillets, I don't remove any of the oil or the grease. I put the mushrooms back in along with the onions. I want it to get seasoned by it. I have 4 steaks to cook, but since they're so big, I didn't have room to cook them all at the same time, so I did the same steps for the second cast iron skillet and cooked the 4th steak. Meanwhile, the other steaks were relaxing in the oven at a very, very low temperature. I had it at 350 and I realized that that was way too high, so I really recommend you doing it at 250. It all depends on the temperature you want your steak to be, and I prefer it to be medium rare. Sometimes I accidentally cook it to be medium, but I think it's still enjoyable. Here is the final product. I have put my onions and mushrooms on top of the steak. I have a little bit of A1 sauce and a beautiful ice cold glass of water. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Bye, I'll see you on the next one.